The axles for the race Jeep are finally here. I've been waiting on these for quite a while now. We've been making great progress on the chassis and frame of the race Jeep, but we can finally get a set of axles underneath so we can start designing our suspension, flexing it out, checking clearances, and continuing on with the King of the Hammers build. Clearly, they are a set of crate axles. These are from Advanced Driveline. We have a 14-bolt full shave rear axle and their Super Kingpin Dana 60. So here in a minute, we're gonna get them out of the crates, put them under the Jeep, and start talking about some of the main benefits of these axles. But real quick, we'll go ahead and do the rundown. So 14-bolt full shave, 4-inch axle tubes, 40 spline shafts, spooled rear with 513s. Now over here on the front, we also have 4-inch axle tubes, 40 spline shafts, ARB locker, let's see, 1550s with Reid, Knuckles, high steer setup, the full 9 yards. These are extremely impressive axles, and for 37s, which are what we're gonna be running, these things are almost going to be practically bulletproof. We shouldn't have to worry about breaking these whatsoever. That is enough talking for now. We're gonna really go into depth with these, and then hopefully in the future make a video explaining the differences between crate axles and a set of DIY Junkyard 1-tons. Kind of pros and cons of each. You know, I've been running the Junkyard set on my JKU for close to 4 or 5 years now, and they've held up well. And a lot of people have been wanting to have a video on the pros and cons of each, but we are not doing that in this video. It is time to get these out of the crates. Mike is on the way. These are some very, very heavy axles. I think the rear is like 740. One of them 700 pounds, one's like 650. Not sure which is which, but either way, we're gonna use the hoist to get it out there. Went ahead and got some, made a little, why am I drawing a blank? We put it on a little wooden dolly and a set of jack stands. That way we can maneuver these around under the Jeep until we're good to go. So we got both axles positioned under the Jeep kind of loosely where we think they're gonna go. Of course, we're gonna have to fine tune it and get them in the exact spot. However, as we sit now, this is right around 109.5-inch wheelbase. So the goal was to shoot for 110. And as you can tell, like, we are stretched way up here in the front. There's the steering gearbox. So we're gonna have to figure out a way to brace the front of the frame, move the gearbox up, and the rear is stretched back quite a bunch as well. I mean, you can see it way back here on the frame. So this is right around 110-inch wheelbase, which is what I was shooting for. Anywhere from 108 to 112 was my goal, and I think we're gonna be able to make at least 109, maybe 110 happen. So Mike and I went ahead and cut out this rear cross member right here, the factory one, and as you can tell, we have a Clayton 3-link cross member installed on the rear. So Ellie, once again, came up to the shop a few days ago, helped me install this cross member. The Clayton cross members, they are, you know, the center section is removable, which helps a lot, especially when you're trying to drop a transmission. And in our case, with this cross member right here, if we were to pull just the T-case, we would have to drop this center section of the cross member for our rear output yoke to clear. But in order to install a JK front cross member as a rear cross member setup for our links, found these beautiful sets of brackets. So these are a full replacement cross member bracket set designed for the front. So this is from Globex Performance. I'd never even heard about these, but you know, if you have a damaged cross member bracket up here in the front, you know, sure, we can add these reinforcement plates from Out of Hand Fab, or you know, if you want to do a full 1/4-inch replacement bracket, Globex has those. Now, to double it up in strength, we are going to add these reinforcement brackets as well back here. But this setup, it made it pretty much foolproof. Since the frame is the same width, it sleeves into the center section and sleeves back over here. We could use it in the rear, everything lined up. We popped it in, so it is tack welded. But with this setup, we have equal length arms on the lowers for the front and rear. And the plan is to hopefully make the front and rear uppers the same length as well. That way we only have to carry one spare in the Jeep. You know, if we bend a lower control arm, doesn't matter if it's front or rear, we have a spare, it's gonna work. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and burn in this rear cross member. I'm happy with where it sits. That way we can keep on moving along. So our new cross member brackets are fully welded in on both sides. Now I was actually showing the camera these yesterday before we tack welded them in place. Unfortunately, I lost all of that footage. My old GoPro 9 right here hit the bed. It was starting to show signs of it, like the lines that would come across the screen, and unfortunately it is dead, so it's no longer usable. New camera came in this morning, so hopefully it looks a little bit better quality. I don't know yet. We'll have to see when we start editing. But like I was saying, these are extremely beefy. So we weld a 1/4 inch plate to the frame, and then our 1/4 inch bracket actually welds on top of that. So, you know, we strengthen up the frame, we strengthen up the bracket, we're good to go. I've got all the corners welded. All we have to do is put this little top plate on just to box the bracket in. So we're gonna go ahead and put these on both sides, hot metal glue them in, and we can move on to the next project, which means it's time to set the body back down, tighten all the body bolts up, start cutting away more of the factory sheet metal, more of the structural supports these guys run under here. I'm rambling. Let's finish this up before we start focusing on the next job. And we still got to talk about the axles. Geez, we got a lot to do. Things are rolling, busy, busy, busy. With the rear cross member all finished up, welded in, I went ahead and dropped the tub back onto the frame, bolted everything down, and let me tell you what, this wheelbase is going to look fantastic. This is like 5 or 6 inches stretched in the front. Looks good, it's gonna operate great, but there's gonna be a lot of work to be able to make this like physically work. We have to stretch the steering box forward, probably cut a lot of that out so at full stuff it's not hitting. And then when we come around here to the rear, you can really get an idea of how far stretched back that is. That's at least like 10 inches. We'll take some measurements at some point to see exactly what the front and rear stretch was over stock. But we're at the point where it's time to replace this and open it up and give us a lot more room back here. So what we're gonna do is weld these Barnes 4-wheel drive. These are like the roll cage frame plates, little sandwich plates. What we're gonna use these for is just an area to mount some 1 3/4 tubing. So we are gonna chop it about right here, plate it with steel on both sides, weld this to the steel, and then have our other mount down there and run our tubing, boom, straight back. So I started out by cutting away that factory structural body piece. It took up a lot of room, and our new setup is gonna give us a lot more space to work with. Now, since we are tying back into the factory thin material, I actually plated the top and bottom of the tub and welded that together. Next up, we had to grab some tubing to kind of follow the contour of the frame and then dip down back into the body. So we put a few bends in the tubing, found out a nice setup that works and also looked good, and we started mocking it up on the Jeep. Now, since this is going to hold our fuel cell and our radiator, decided it was going to be best to have bushing ends on both sides to kind of minimize our vibration and shock load. So we used the Barnes 4-wheel drive DIY bushing kits, went in like a breeze. This is probably the only area on the body, frame, and roll cage that's gonna have a rubber bushing, and it's just because of what we're mounting to it. So we went ahead, made sure everything fit, tack welded it in, and then we got started on the other side and did the exact same process, finishing up with a pretty nice result. I'm not entirely sure what to call these two pieces that we just made, but either way, we are finished up. Actually, they'll be called like a little subframe assembly, who knows? But they are tied in. As you can tell, I raised the body about 1 foot off the frame just to make sure this is all structurally sound. We can push on it, it's not bending anywhere. I am happy with it. So, like I've mentioned multiple times, our fuel cell is going to mount inside this pocket. We're gonna have to cut this cross member out, and of course check all of our link clearances coming up before we do that. But this is going to hold it nicely. It's gonna suck it down nice and tight, and we don't have to do a ton of roll cage design, you know, really overcomplicating where we wanna mount these. We can run these up into the roll cage with another bushing up there just to strengthen it up a little bit, but I am happy with this job. So it's kind of crazy because that job right there took multiple hours. That was probably 9 hours of work getting that all done. And then here we are, it's like 1 minute in a YouTube video. And that kind of has been a thing for all of this. Building a race Jeep is not easy at all. There's a lot of work involved, but I don't want to show it all on the camera just because it gets repetitive and a little bit boring. But you know, the stuff behind the scenes that you don't see or just might look easy is kind of in the end what takes a lot of the time. But that is done. I'm happy with it. It is time to circle back around to the beginning when we were talking about these Advanced Driveline axles. So Advanced Driveline is a fairly new brand in the axle game, but they are pumping out some insanely strong axles. Whether it's a bolt-in Dana 44 for your Jeep, a semi-float rear 60, or a full-blown set of 1-tons, bolt-in ready or customized for your Jeep. Now these axles specifically are available for a bolt-in package. However, you know, since we're doing some crazy suspension work, figured it was better just to get them bare. But the only difference would be there'd be JK specific brackets on there. So going back, you know, I've already mentioned it's the Dana 60 40 spline, 4-inch axle tubes. We're gonna go back to the basics here. So this is a Dana 60 center section, and it's not just your OEM Dana 60 center section, it's actually like a proprietary housing. And you can tell that first off by the fact that they have 4-inch axle tubes. Your traditional Dana 60s are usually only offered in 3 or 3.5-inch axle tubes. They bump it up to 4-inch as an option. Now the face here on the diff cover typically is machined flat with your pinion angle set at 0. So you can almost see like a similar characteristics to one of the Curry Dana 60s that has the diff cover on top, giving you a little more clearance. This actually does have, looks like anywhere from 10 to 14 degrees built in, giving us a little bit more ground clearance over here on the diff. Inside of our beautiful front axle here, I chose to go with 513s and the 40 spline ARB. We have 40 spline shafts actually going to a 1550 U-joint, which is massive. So a little bit different, a little backstory. You know, typically your Kingpin axles could not physically fit a 1550 U-joint just because that is massive. That was an upgrade mostly found in the Super Duty axles, and I actually did it in my JKU out there. But this is possible due to the Reid Racing Kingpin C. What that did is open up a ton of room, allowing us to run a bigger joint. Now out here we have our Super Kingpin Reid Racing Knuckle, which once again also is opened up for bigger axle U-joints as well. And what these also do is go away from our typical spindle and wheel bearing design and actually run a Ford Super Duty unit bearing. Makes it a lot easier to, you know, kind of fix issues out on the trails later, and maintenance, much easier to replace a unit bearing. Now, since this is a Super Duty unit bearing and we have 8 on 6.5 lug pattern, I'm pretty sure this is probably the Artec Super unit bearing, because this axle is set up for JK ABS and wheel speed sensors as well. So that's kind of the lowdown on that setup. We also get our high steer machined plate up here. This is set up for a JK, and you can actually measure between the distance of your ball joint or kingpin out to the mounting surface, and that should be the same distance as your steering gearbox from the pitman arm or the center bore out to the drag link mount on the pitman arm. That's your Ackerman angle. So this is set up perfectly for a JK. The axle comes complete with brakes. I chose to run Slugs instead of lockouts just because we're never going to be driving this thing in 2-wheel drive. And finally, we added a little extra caster or separation to this axle. So typically these are gonna come with 10 degrees of separation, which means if your pinion angle was at 0, you would have 10 degrees of caster. Now, if we dial our pinion angle up to, let's say 2 degrees, that means our caster would be at 8 degrees. Now, typically 10 degrees is more than enough for a street driven Jeep, but we bumped it all the way up to 14 degrees of separation. Mostly being that we're gonna have a ton of travel in this thing. At full down travel, we wanna have a good pinion angle, but I still want to have some kind of caster. That way when we're bombing through the whoops, the tires and Jeep just want to go straight no matter where we are in our suspension cycle. So we added 14 degrees of separation, which means, you know, we could run, I gotta work on my math right here, but if we had a 5-degree pinion angle, we would have 9 degrees of caster, and so on throughout the variant pinion angle changes. It's gonna be super nice having that extra caster available, and we'll talk a little bit more about that once we start building our suspension links. Now, moving over here to our rear 14 bolt, once again, this is not just your typical 14 bolt, this is once again a proprietary housing. So you can actually see on top here that we have like machined plates for a bolt-in truss. Both the front and rear tubes are welded, so there's really no reason for a traditional truss unless you plan on mounting your link mounts on top. So we'll come down here to the shave, and I thought this was pretty cool as well. They actually designed this center section. It's not just a off-the-shelf 14-bolt center section. It's custom made with this shave incorporated. So typically, whenever you do a 14-bolt shave, you have to shave a huge section off of the bottom of the diff, weld a plate on for these 2 bolts to go into, and unfortunately it can be a weak spot and a place for these 2 bolts to leak. But as you can tell, this is all structurally made into the new housing. And it's kind of crazy because from the back, it doesn't really resemble your typical 14-bolt. Either way, the 14-bolt is an insanely strong axle, large ring gear, super easy to set up, and having that pinion support bearing in there makes it really strong. So the rear also has 4-inch axle tubes, 40 spline shafts, and full brake kit as well. Now in the rear, we are running 513s as well, but instead of a traditional locker, we're actually running a spool, which means the rear axle is gonna be locked all the time. They are stronger, it's one less thing to worry about, and once we're off-roading, the rear should pretty much always stay locked. But we have a ton of work to do on these axles. All the brackets and everything typically are 3-inch or 3.5-inch diameter brackets, which means everything that's gonna get welded on here has to get opened up to a 4-inch axle tube. Advanced Driveline is partnered up with the channel and is offering everybody a discount code. So if you're looking for an axle upgrade, whether it's an upgraded Dana 44 for your Jeep, semi-float rear 60, custom axles like this, or full-blown bolt-in ready 1-tons, you can use the code Gear and Gadgets to get a discount off your set or individual axles, or you can always call them up and mention the discount code as well. So it's pretty cool having a discount code available for axles because typically that's just not something that happens. So if you're in the market, I would highly suggest checking them out. And Advanced Driveline is owned by the same great folks at Off-Road Elements. So, you know, if you've ever dealt with Off-Road Elements, you'll know that they go way above and beyond with their customer service, and they just push out some really good stuff. Well, as it turns out, I think we're at a fairly good stopping point for this video. We have a lot of prep work to do and a few other things to figure out before we try to get our fuel cell in place. What we need to do is figure out how low we can sit this fuel cell before it interferes with our rear suspension links. So first off, we're gonna have to cut this cross member because I've went ahead and kind of mocked up our Barnes 4-wheel drive link mount over there in the frame, and if you can see from there up to on top of a truss, link's gonna hit this. So we'll cut this out and eventually replace it with a higher span of DOM tubing, but we need to figure out our link mounts, where they're gonna go on the frame, as well as over here on the axle. So we have the Barnes Pro Series 14-bolt truss, super low profile, but like I mentioned before, this is designed for a 3-inch axle tube. You can see the big difference right there. So we're gonna have to, trim this out to 4 inches, probably trim a few spots on here just so it fits on the axle nice and snug, and then figure out where we wanna mount our upper links as well. Once we have those in place, that out of there, we can go ahead and sit our fuel cell in place and start working on the mount over here. But that's gonna be for another video. There's a lot of stuff to knock out, or at least get prepped before the next video. Oh, and I almost forgot, the Jeep trivia. So we do have a winner from 2 videos back, and I had to write it down because it's a unusual name. But the winner for that is Vanique Hout Family. So Vanique Hout Family, leave a comment below. I will get with you, we'll exchange emails and send you out the gift card from Off-Road Elements your way. So it's time for another Jeep trivia question. Not sure if I can keep promising gift cards for the winner, but we'll do it whenever we can. Random page. Oh, that's the answers. Heck no. All right, try this again. Random page right here. Jeep drivers can name many reasons they buy a Jeep. A, the price. B, good all-weather vehicles. C, easy to drive. Or D, all of the above. Ooh, that is a tough question because it really depends on what we're looking at here. Let me know, A through D, what would you say? I'll see you guys in the next video. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up. See you then. Thanks for watching.